I lost 43 pounds, so I've gained. I'm back up to 224. I'm glad to say, and I feel much better.
Well, that is
take about a year. Thank you.
Yeah, that is great to hear. Great to see you. I mean, because I know it was dire straits for a bit there, but and this 30 for 30 is going to be incredible. And Rick, I tell you, I go back into the 70s. You know, when you were wrestling the Wahoo McDaniels of the world, the Chris Taylors, the Andre the Giants, and I mean, just the memories of that. But in perspective for everybody, because so many different age groups listening and watching the show, the biggest difference of when you started out in wrestling those guys to later in your career, how the sport of wrestling in your eyes changed.
Well, the biggest word would be marketing. The second thing would be the genius of Vince McMahon. The level of insensitivity has changed considerably. Back when Andre and I were driving up and down the road, if your name was on the marquee, you didn't make it, you didn't get paid. And now we have guaranteed contracts. And don't misunderstand me, the schedule is equally as difficult for the guys. As a matter of fact, they're on a 17-day tour of Europe right now, both SmackDown and Raw, 17 consecutive days. So I used to go out for 70 or 80 days, but I can relate to what they're doing. And it's a tough business, but it's the genius of Vince McMahon, and he's rewarded the kids with, they've got a wellness program second to none. They, stand by their product. He's strict. He's a strict disciplinarian, and it's an era right now that I would have had a hard time existing in. Let's put it like that.
World Championship Wrestling, something that my brother and I would sit and watch every single weekend, and the legend Gordon Soley interviewing you, and you would get up there and you would start with the whole thing, which has now become iconic, which we've been showing all morning long, and it'll be all over the 30 for 30 tonight, how imitated it has been, how inspirational it was. Where did it come from? Where did the whole limousine riding, jet flying, where did all of that start?
You know, Mike, I'm going to tell you the truth. People have a hard time believing this. It started in Buckhead probably about 3 a.m. on Friday night before. I just started thinking, because we'd wrestle in Atlanta on Friday nights, or we'd fly in on a private jet or something. And the 80s, Atlanta and Buckhead were just the place to be. And we went out all night. I mean, I wish I could tell you differently, but when we got to the studio at 9 o'clock over on Techwood with Turner, and it was Dusty, me, the Four Horsemen, Magnum, Nikita, the World Warriors. I mean, it was a cast of incredible talent, and we just went out and put a product out, and I was just thinking on my feet. I guess it's the gift that God gave me, and I had was really inspired by Dusty Rhodes, who is probably the most charismatic wrestler of our time. He may be the most charismatic of all time, and a very intelligent guy, but we just had fun. And if you're not having fun, I'm sure you guys realize that if you didn't like what you were doing, you wouldn't be as successful as you are. Mike and Mike is an international show. I watch it all the time, not only because I know you guys, but it's very informative, and you guys make it light and fun, and you guys have got a tremendous product, and that's why I'm up every morning watching you guys. When I was in the hospital, which I was on life support for 10 days, the worst part of it for me when I came out of life support was I didn't have cable TV. I couldn't watch ESPN. So that was worse than the DTs.
Rick, as far as the career and the marketing that you talked about, but it was the personalities that carried this. Obviously what you guys did in the ring, but the personality. So how far away the personality that you gave us is away from your real personality? How much of a reach did you have to go, or was it a reach?
I'm glad we never got hooked up at Darius's party afterwards. You guys always took off after the golf tournament. You wouldn't have to ask me that question. And for pretty much everything I said or did in my life, much to my dismay at times, I lived. If I said it, I was doing it, Mike. That's what made it real. I didn't wear the same suit on TV for 5 years. So, you can go to Michael's of Kansas City or Taylor Richards in Charlotte. I just bought a lot of clothes, and Bruce Friedman's in Atlanta. I'm sure you're familiar with Friedman shoes. They're worldwide. The alligator shoes and all that. I was out there. I thought I was Joe Namath. Not Ali, but Joe Namath.
Well, the legendary figures of that time and the charismatic ones and the outspoken ones, the braggadocio.
Right.
And I saw the comparison that you were talking about with Ali back in the day and with Joe Namath. It's another interesting one. How was that received? Where was the negative side of it? Again, now it's celebrated. Now we've got Snoop Dogg saying that all the rappers listen to you, and that's where they got a lot of their inspiration, that they wanted to be like that. How was it received at the time?
It was, well, number one, I was, portraying myself as a bad guy.
Right.
Or a heel, I guess. I can talk the way everybody else talks anyway. But it's hard, and I don't say this to be, braggadocious, but it's hard to get mad at somebody that's giving you the best product. My feeling was whether there were 200 people, which there were many times in the small towns, when I had to wrestle an hour with a guy that couldn't wrestle for 15 minutes, my philosophy was to give them everything they paid for, and win, lose, or draw. And hell, I never won. I wanted them to go home and say, God, Ric Flair put on a hell of a show. And they don't remember. If you're really good at what you do, they don't remember who wins or loses anyway. So I won 16 times and lost 3,840 times. So that's not much of an exaggeration.
But you put on a show every time. We're talking to Ric Flair, again, wrestling legend, WWE Hall of Famer as a Nature Boy in 2008, and then with the Four Horsemen in 2012. And the story certainly of Nature Boy and how you got that after the plane accident and recovering from that and all. Outside of that, which, again, we'll see in the 30 for 30, take us inside the ring to what you do, to the landings, to the physicality of it, and just kind of explain to people, you guys make it look so easy, but just how physically demanding and painful that can be.
Well, all they have to do is subpoena the records from Jim Andrews and in Birmingham to find out what our guys go through. I mean, we have... if I'm not mistaken, 5 broken necks in the last 6 years. Now there a lot of times, we have one guy totally paralyzed. But with the technology today, they can put a kid back together. They can put neck surgeries back together, but it ends their career. So that alone, aside from the shoulder, the knees, the hips, Hulk Hogan, who I've gotten very close to, has had 11 surgeries in the last 5 years on his back. And he's in constant pain. I mean, he wasn't able to come to my premiere here in Atlanta because of his back. But I'll tell you what, when I was in the hospital, even though I don't remember it, in the coma, he came to see me twice. So, as did a lot of people. I don't remember him, but I mean, a lot of people came to see me, and those are things that I'll remember my entire life. But to answer your question, you just go out there and wing it, and you can't. If you start thinking about it, I'm sure Mike Golick, you understand what I'm saying. You can't go out there and worry about getting hit. You can't worry about some guy chop blocking you, or some guy, in an impact sport or a contact sport. You can't overthink that. You got to go in that ring, just ready to go and take everything. And the minute you start thinking about getting hurt, you need to get out of the ring, as you do need to get out of the game of football.
So, Rick, as people watch,
can't worry about getting hurt.
As people watch this 30 for 30, and a younger generation gets to know the Nature Boy Ric Flair and all that was about you wrestling inside the ring and outside the ring, and they finish watching it and they say, you know what, I want to be like Ric Flair. What's the pros of that and what's the cons of that?
Well, number one, I wouldn't advise that to anybody. Well, the pros to it is I was committed to it almost to the point of being obsessed with being a wrestler. And when I knew that I was good, I just lost contact with the world. I just wanted to go out every night. I'd be gone. Sometimes I've had weeks where I'd be in Puerto Rico Sydney, Tokyo, St. Louis, back to Chicago, and back to London. I mean, in a 10-day period. So I mean, that's how I used to travel, and that's the way I worked. And usually every night I wrestled an hour, because in the old days, if the promoter didn't want his guy to do you a favor, then he had to wrestle you an hour. So it was easier for me. But if you haven't wrestled an hour, it's a long night if you don't know what you're doing and if you're not in shape. So it was a difficult life, but I never looked at it like that, guys. I'm telling you, I loved it, and I was extremely selfish. I look back on that now, and I wouldn't want anybody to be that dedicated that they didn't disregard their family, but they made them secondary to what they're doing. And I did a lot of that, which it talks about that a lot, and it creates resentment. I'm good with all my kids now, but trust me, they all had Christmas presents and cars and all that, but nothing buys the time. And I see you, Mike, with your son all the time, who's doing an excellent job. I saw you guys call a game together the other night. That must have been thrilling for you to be with your son. But nothing replaces the on-hands, relationship with kids and their parents. And I wasn't there for that. My two littler ones, I was a lot more than my older ones. But it just you can't. When I see the film, I think, God, I made a lot of money and I had a lot of fun, but I should have said no sometimes when they wanted me to go somewhere and I had a day off, but a promoter would call and say, I see that you're off, or he would call the guy booking me, will Flair come here? And of course I went. So, and I regret that, but otherwise, the behavior, I wouldn't recommend that for anybody. I wouldn't recommend spending the money on clothes or wardrobe. I wouldn't recommend staying out all night until the bars closed, depending on what city. God, Chicago and Atlanta used to kill me. But, aside from that, the charisma and having fun, and just, you need to really enjoy what you do in any aspect of life, whether you're a lawyer or a doctor. You can't dread going to work every morning. God only knows, you guys probably are up at 5 a.m. to start the show, and but you got to love what you're doing, and but it reflects in your product, and I loved what I was doing, and I don't think anybody sent anybody home where they spent $5 in the 70s or spent $300 for a front row seat like they do now. So that's the good part of me.
He is the Rolex wearing, limousine riding, jet flying, wheeling and dealing, the one and only Nature Boy. And again, the 30 for 30 is tonight, presented by Mini. It debuts on ESPN at 10 o'clock Eastern. We are certainly looking forward to seeing that, and we very much appreciate this, Rick. And we're very glad that you were well, that you came through this, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.
Rick. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you very much, and really enjoy you guys, and thank you for all the respect.
Thank you, Rick. That's Ric Flair with us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Mike and Mike, presented by Progressive Insurance. You and I are close together in age. We remember that before wrestling became anywhere near what it is now.
Yeah.
He was fighting with guys like Tommy Wildfire Rich and Jimmy Superfly Snuka and people like that, and I grew up with that as well.
Oh, me too. I loved watching that stuff.
Okay, short break, and it just gets better and better.
Yeah.
Aaron Judge, Yankees Super